Hi everyone, I hope you guys are doing good. So as a part of our Python tutorial series, in last lecture we learned about creating Python scripts and creating Python functions in those scripts, right? We also learned how to import one Python file into another Python file. Also, we saw how using main variable, the execution of Python scripts differs when it runs individually and when it is getting imported into another file. Now, in this lecture, we will learn about lambda functions. Okay, so without wasting time, let's start. So this is there are some of the functions which I have prepared to demo you guys the lambda functions. Okay, so the normal function definition and execution no looks like this. So using def keyword we defined a normal function. So example is I'm defining a doubler function in which I'm passing a number and it is going to return the double of that number, right? So this is a simple definition using which we can define a function, right? Then we can call the function, right? By passing the arguments in it, right? So and also we can save the result in the execution of that doubler function into one variable and then print the output, right? So this is the normal flow or normal execution of a simple function, right? So let's try this. Let me define this function in idle shell. Okay, so let me paste it. Okay, so doubler function got defined, right? Now let's call this function by passing argument 10, right? So let me paste it. 20, right? So I'm passing 10 as an integer in this doubler function and it is returning me 20, right? That means this function execution is working properly, right? I can also save the result into one variable called x and then print that x, right? So this is also a way which in which we execute the function, right? So I'm calling this doubler function by passing the argument 10 and saving the result into x, and now I'm printing the value of x, right? So let me just paste it here, right? 20, right? So this is the normal flow. We define function, we call the function, and we save the result into one variable and we print that value, right? So this is the normal flow of any function, right? Now we have to learn assignment of function to a variable. Okay, so suppose I have defined already this doubler function, right? Now if I am writing x equals to doubler, that means this x has also become a function which is equivalent to this doubler. Okay, so we have two functions for the doubler operation, that is x and doubler both, right? So you can assign a function to one variable without parenthesis, then that variable will also become a function. Okay, so let's check this, right? So let me just copy it and let me just paste it here. X equals to doubler, right? So before doing that, let me restart the cell. So I just want to, forget everything which are already executed, and then again define this doubler function. Let me define this doubler function again. Okay, so doubler function is defined, right? Now if I am doing x equals to doubler and then in bracket I am giving 10, that means I am executing this doubler function and assigning the result into x. But if I write x equals to doubler, right? That means I am assigning this doubler function without executing it, right? I am assigning this doubler function into x. That means now my x will act as a doubler function. Okay, let's try this. So let me do enter, right? Now, now instead of calling doubler function, let's call x, right? So x is a function, so I'm passing in x, I'm passing 10, right? So let's try this. 20, right? So now x is a equivalent doubler function. X will act as a doubler function and it will do the same operation which this doubler function does, right? That means we learn that how to assign a function to another variable and make that variable act as a function. Okay, so this is like replicating one function uh, into another name, right? So we learned how to assign assignment of function to a variable, right? So function can be assigned to a variable and then that can be used, right? Now we will learn the assignment of lambda function to a variable. Okay, so this is the syntax of lambda function. So lambda function syntax is like starts with the lambda keyword, and these are the arguments. Okay, the parameters of lambda, and this is the expression. I mean the execution of lambda, right? So lambda function is very simple. This is also called a function because it has no name, right? So if you see normal function and lambda function, right? So normal function starts with keyword def, right? In lambda function we are not giving any keyword as def, right? Starts with lambda, right? And we are giving the function name as doubler. Lambda has no name for the function, right? So lambda function has no name. It has arguments, although it has parameter equivalent to the parameter in normal function, and then it has expressions, the execution, the body of the function, right? So that will be in one line, right? So this is called lambda function, right? So lambda function are unknown function or unnamed functions, right? You can define you starting with lambda, give the arguments, and then write the logic of that function, right? So let's define this function. So x equals to, I'm defining x equals to lambda a. So a is the argument and the body a into 2, that is equivalent to a doubler function, right? So we are passing a number and the lambda function is giving me the result as double of that number, right? Now let's call this function. So how we call this function, right? So x has a double of a into t, right? So x is now a lambda function, right? So let's call x and pass 10 in that, right? Pass 10 in that, right? Enter, right? So you can see it is giving me 20, right? So lambda functions are one line functions, which is very useful, right? Because we don't need to give any name. We don't used to define it using def keyword and then writing the logic and then executing, everything happening in one line, right? So I'm defining function defining the function also using lambda. I'm passing the argument as well. I'm writing the logic of that function as well. I'm assigning the function into this x variable as well. Now this x variable is a lambda function, and now I'm calling this lambda function using x and passing the parameter as 10, right? So this is the lambda function, right? So this way you can call lambda functions, right? So either you can call print or you can call this using x at 10, right? Calling this function, or you can print while calling also you can print, right? Now in lambda function you can have multiple arguments as well. You can take as many argument separated by comma, right? And you can write the logic here in the right side of column, right? The only difference is that in lambda function you can write all the logic you have to write in just one line, right? This is a one-liner function. So everything you have to write in one line when you define a lambda function. Okay, now let's try this with the two parameter. Okay, so I'm giving this function x equals to lambda, a and b are my argument, and the logic is a into b, that is multiplying a into b, right? So now x is defined, my lambda function is defined. Let's call this x function with so how you will pass two parameter using comma separator, right? So I'm passing 10 comma 2, right? So that's how you pass multiple parameter in lambda function, right? So it is giving me result 20, right? 10 into 2, right? 20. So in lambda you can define multiple arguments as well. Okay. Now, one more syntax is you can define the lambda functions in the bracket, and after that, in the bracket, you can also define the parameters, the arguments values which you want to pass in this lambda function. So everything happening in one line, right? So here you are defining the function, lambda function, right? And passing the or defining the parameter a and b, writing the logic of that function, and then you are also passing the argument of this lambda function 10 and 2 into this a and b, right? And so the function is defined, function parameters are defined, right? Function is getting executed with the defined parameter and defined and passed parameter, and the result is saved into x, right? And I'm printing x, right? So let's try this. So let me try this. Let's paste this, enter, right? So now function is got evaluated with 10 and 2, and then it is saved into x, right? So let's check the first type of x, right? Type of x, right? So that will say what is the type of x? Is it a function or is it an integer? Right. So you can see it is an integer in this case. Why? Because here the lambda function is getting evaluated completely with the passed parameter, and the result is getting passed into x. Right. That's why x is showing as integer. But in above case, x will be a function because you are just putting the definition of lambda functions into x, right? You are not executing it, right? So if you check the type of x, this will show as a function, right? Now, since x is an integer, so what we can do, we can print the result, right? Let's print x 20, right? So I'm passing 10 and 2, and it is getting passed into a and b, and the logic getting executed, and the result is saved into x, and I'm printing x, right? And there is one more syntax in which you can do everything in the same, right? If you take this complete logic into print statement, that will just do define the lambda function, passing argument, and printing the result as well, right? So you can do everything in just one line, right? So I'm printing the result, right? I'm defining the lambda function, I'm passing the argument as well, and after executing this function and the functions with the parameter, I'm printing the result as well, right? So it is giving me 20, right? So I hope you guys understood the lambda functions, how to define lambda function, how to call this lambda function, how to use that, right? Now we'll discuss about the use cases of lambda function, why we need to define lambda function, right? Because if you see, lambda function is also equivalent to this normal functions, right? So here also, just that there's no name, but it's very much equivalent to this normal function, right? So instead of using def keyword, no def syntax, why we are using lambda syntax and defining an unknown function, right? So there are multiple use cases for that. One use case is this, that suppose I'm defining a function, my function, and I'm passing a parameter as n, and I'm in return I'm returning lambda, right? That means the lambda function I'm here defining, and as defining an argument z, and the logic is n into z, right? So whatever number I'm passing, right, so that will be multiplied with the z, right? So in this function there are two arguments. One is n, that is the function argument, and one is z, that is the lambda argument, lambda function argument, right? So when we do this, right, so let's define this. So when we do this, right, so let's define this. Let me paste it, right? So my function got defined, right? So if I call now my function after passing the parameter as 10, right? So will it give me result, right? Let's see. I think we are expecting an error. Okay. What is that error? It is not giving me result, but it is telling me that function, my function, has a lambda, right, at this position. So we have a lambda function in this my function. So it is expecting that you pass the value of lambda as well, right? Now my function can take only one argument, right? So we cannot pass lambda value along with the my function. To do that there is alternative. Okay, so what I'm doing, I'm assigning x, a variable where I am executing my func and passing the n as 2. Okay, so this will define me this will define a doubler function for me. Let's see. So I'm defining a variable x equals to my func, and in my func I'm passing a value as 2, right? So when I'm passing a value as 2, right, and let's do enter, right? So x has a value as my function 2, right? That is a doubler function. Now it has become doubler function because I'm passing it as a 2, right? But I have not passed the value of z. So when I'll pass the value of z while calling this x function, right? Let's check the type of this x. Okay, so if you check the type of x, right, type x, this is a function, right? So here I am assigning this function, my function, with argument to this variable, but this is not a normal function, right? This is a function having lambda. That's why this my function 2 is not getting evaluated and assigned the result into x. Instead it has taken parameter as 2, and the instance or the object of this my function with parameter as 2, that is being assigned to x, right? Now to pass the value of z, we have to pass the value in while calling this x function. Okay, so if I write print, right, x, and pass the parameter as 10, right? So I'm passing 2 in this my function, that means in n parameter, right? And it is assigned to x, right? And now I'm I'm calling this x function and passing the value as 10. So 10, I'm passing the value for z lambda, right? And what is the logic? It is returning n into z, right? So n is 2, z is 10, right? So what it should return? 20, right? So it is giving me the value as 20, right? So you can see, no, using lambda function. So when we define lambda function, when you want to create the multiple instances of same function, right? So this is a doubler function because I'm assign in my function I'm giving 2 and assigning it to x, right? If in my function I'm giving value as 3, it will become a tripler function, right? And y will become a function which will be a tripler function. Whatever will pass the value in y, it will triple that value, right? Here x is a doubler function. Whatever will pass in x, it will give me a double of that value, right? So let's try this also, tripler function. Okay, so let me just paste it here. Y equals to my func 3, right? So my function got defined, right? Now let's call this function y, right? So let me just paste it here, enter, right? So it is giving me 30, right? Because for n I'm passing 3, and then I'm for z I'm passing 10, right, for lambda. So it is giving me 10 into 3, 30, right? So that's a triple function, right? So I hope you understood the concept. When we use lambda function, when we have one function, right, but we want to create multiple instance of that function, multiple objects of that function, and use as per our need in the other function bodies. Okay, so there lambda functions are very useful, right? If we don't use lambda function, right, then what will happen? We'll have to write the logic like this. If you want to do without lambda function, then we'll have to define a doubler function. We'll have to define a tripler function which will do return the triple of that number. Doubler function will return the double of that number. Then we'll have to assign the doubler function into x, and then define the my function and pass the number to which we want to double or triple, and then pass the function, doubler function, in a parameter, right? And then in return I'm calling that doubler function which I'm passing, and that is x is a doubler function. I'm calling that function and passing the n value, right? And then again I'm assigning the tripler function to the x variable, and then passing that tripler function into this my function, and then in return I'm calling the tripler function and passing the number, right? So this is the normal flow, right? But if you have multiple uses, here we have only two uses, right? But if you have 10 or 20 times you have to use this, right? Then lambda functions are very useful. You create the object or instance when it is required, right? As per our need. Let's check this also. So let me define this function. Okay, so before doing that, let me restart this cell so that everything, all the functions and variables get no get lost, and all the values of the assignments get lost, right? So let me just paste this. So our doubler function got defined, right? Now let me assign it to one variable called x, right? So doubler function got defined into x. Now let me define a function called my function, okay, in which I'm passing the n one number parameter and x. X is a doubler function, right? And I'm returning what? I'm calling this doubler function x and passing the number as n, right? So let's do enter, right? So our my function got defined and I'm using doubler function, passing the doubler function in that, right? Now let's call my function. Okay, so how you will call? So just my function in bracket, I am giving number as 10, and doubler function I have to pass, so I'm giving as x, right? So x is a doubler function, right? So let's do enter, right? So it is giving me 20, right? So I'm calling this my function, I'm giving the number, whatever number I'm giving, and I'm giving the doubler function as parameter, and it is giving me 20, right? Similarly, I can define tripler function as well again, right? So process will be same. We'll have to define a tripler function, right? We have to define a tripler function. Tripler function got defined, right? Then we have to take the tripler function into this x variable, right? So let's take that, right? So x has not tripler function. Now let's define the my function, right? So let's define the my function. So my function has what? The number which I'm passing and x as a tripler function as a parameter. And in return, I'm calling the tripler function and passing the value as n, right? Let me do enter, right? So now let's call this tripler function. So how will call? My func, right? In bracket 10 comma x. So 10 is the number I'm passing, x is the tripler function I'm passing. So what it should give me? 30, right? So this is the result of tripler function, right? So I hope you understood, but otherwise, if you won't use this lambda function, you'll have to define all the functions and then call all the functions in another functions, right? So instead, if you define a function with lambda expressions in that, you can reuse that lambda, right? Using that function argument, you can create objects of different functions and pass the lambda at runtime, right? So I hope you guys understood the concepts of functions and lambda functions in Python. If you guys like this lecture, please subscribe my channel. Thank you guys.